land use law. It's an invigorating, exciting topic that I know you're all looking forward to hearing. And because you're here to hear this presentation, Toilet's offering 10 extra credit points just for being here. So this generosity knows no bounds. So tonight I'm going to take a little bit different approach. I'm not going to ask you about case law or any kind of specific law. I'm going to talk more about redevelopment law and how that applies to you as a potential developer, how you can benefit from that, how you can utilize it. To start, I'm going to talk about some of the ins and outs of redevelopment law and its history there. So this next slide is going to be lengthy, and I'm not going to talk about each one. I'm just going to let them flow. So redevelopment law was born out of federal subsidies for housing, and over time it's evolved into different adding things into it to accommodate development and other types of things to what we have today, which is I'm not pushing very hard. I just push in the middle.
Points, yeah.
Okay. All right. There we go. So it's evolved, and this is only until 2007. But obviously, every year during the legislature, there's updates and revisions and changes that happen to the law that affect you as a resident of a city, if your city does redevelopment, but also as a potential developer or somebody in the industry who's looking to develop. This will impact opportunities associated with you in the future. So what is a redevelopment agency? A redevelopment agency is created from a municipal entity, whether it's a city or a county. They create that, but it's a completely separate entity. So Paul works for the redevelopment agency of Salt Lake County, but he is completely separate from the county and everything that happens there. They're completely separate budget-wise and everything. Anyway, so that's just to give you kind of a general idea. They are completely separate bodies, so when we say redevelopment agency of whatever, Salt Lake City, Salt Lake County, Murray City, they are a separate entity that has separate regulations. So today we're going to talk about the three different types of projects that can happen with redevelopment. So you have urban renewal areas, which have conditions of blight or downward transitional, economically, areas that are economically suffering or having problems, have contamination or perceived contamination. Economic development areas are job creation areas. So those areas are instituted have been instituted here in the state, in different cities for like eBay or Oracle or some of those big job providers and job creators. Those are how those are used. And then most recently, community development areas. Excuse me. These are kind of new on the scene, and these have been really popular with cities because this thing right here, you'll see on the other two that there's what's called a taxing entity committee. And what that is anybody who leverages taxes on an area, whether it's in the county or the city, they have to come together and they have to agree or approve a budget and a plan. Both of these. But for a community development area, that is individually negotiated. So if you're in Salt Lake County, I'll use that one because I work there, and you create a CDA or a community development area, you go individually to the school district, the special districts, or other entities that leverage tax, and you will negotiate one-on-one with them to get their buy-in to a project. So it's not a group that gets together and votes on it. It's an individual negotiation, which ends up with an interlocal agreement for you to proceed in your project.
So does that mean you can have any number of CDAs?
What do you mean any number of CDAs? Sorry.
In a given area, just how many? I mean, are there developers just, you know what, I want to do this, I'm going to go for it?
So they have to be municipally driven. But in a lot of cases, a developer is the one who comes to the table and says, I own 300 acres here and I want to do X, Y, Z, but you as a city, I want you to come together and put a community development area together for me because I need X amount of dollars for my pro forma to offset those costs or to make this thing pencil or whatever. So you can have as many as you want. The problem that you're going to have is if you're doing it because somebody's telling you to do it and it's not a need, then people start to get leery because you've got to go talk to all these people and you just keep coming through the door saying, I want to do one here, I want to do one here, I want to do one here. The justification gets difficult from my experience.
I guess my question, is it kind of an a la carte? I mean, it's just...
Yeah, it kind of is. So if you go back, the urban renewal area has a mix of uses, retail, commercial, residential. This is a job creator, so it's usually focused around commercial office and whatnot. This one right here has been used, for, not predominantly, but in a few cases for municipal projects. So the city has come through and said, we want to create a city center or some sort of development. They've utilized this tool, and then the contractor has developed it. That actually,
Yeah, how many
sure it's
counties,
clear.
for example, in Butler County right now?
How many CDAs? Or how many of these projects total? CDAs? In the last probably year, we've come through our door because we're a taxing entity and the city's come to us because we're a big dog. There's probably been 6 or 8 in the last year. So these are pretty popular just because of that fact that you don't have to go and get everybody buying. You just go individually and say, this is what I need from you. Are you guys okay with that? This is what I need from you. Simplistically, that's how it goes. So this is going to run through just kind of an urban renewal area, how the process goes to set it up. One of the elements of an urban renewal area, because you have something called blight, and blight has a negative connotation when you talk to the public about it, but really what it is it's just an element of dilapidation or degradation to an area that is defined in statute, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But a part of this is you have multiple hearings, publishing of notices. It's quite the lengthy process. Salt Lake County in 2009 adopted 2 of these project areas, and they started in 2008 and didn't get adopted until mid-2009 and ended 2009. So they're not easy to come by. They do take some time, but they're not by any means impossible to overcome. So if you have any, I'm just going to kind of go through this. You guys can look at the slide. The process starts with you going to your public body and identifying an area that you think would be able to qualify for an urban renewal area. Then there's a parcel by parcel analysis done to see whether or not it meets the criteria for blight. Then you take that to the taxing entity committee. They have to approve it. Then you take it to your city council, county council. They have to approve it. From there, you go on and you can create the budget and the plan, which then have to be approved by the taxing entity committee again, and they have to be approved by your public body, whether it's city or county. And so it's quite a lengthy process.
Okay, so
Go ahead.
the overall reason a developer would want to do this is they're going to get tax dollars,
Right.
tax credits.
Well, they're going to get, well, it's all negotiated. So dollars is what they're going to get.
Okay.
And depending on the agency, so I'm going to get to the meat and potatoes here, and I'll go through this pretty fast. This is just to give you an idea. This is going to be a Dropbox if you guys want to go through it and get more familiar with it. Ryan, real quick.
In this process, what are we looking at time frame wise? Say, starting with the designated survey area to where we're actually taxing or receiving taxing.
Well, so that's a great question. So this process right here doesn't necessarily denote the tax increment is available to you. All this process right here sets up the mechanism whereby the tax increment can be generated. So, like I said, the county did 2 projects. One took 6 months, one took a year just to get here.
Okay.
So, depending on the area and the other implications of the site, it can take quite a while, but there are other pressures that can move these things forward. So,
Now, the other question I had on your slide was,
okay.
When you're going through that process, you prepare a draft, under 6B, a draft project area budget.
Right.
So whatever you're planning on doing, you put together a budget.
Right.
And you submit that, the city, various entities review it, and it goes also to a public review. So when that gets reviewed, people are going to say, and any line item in that budget is subject to review. Your TIs are too high, or your site improvements are too low. You need to revise that, or it won't be approved. Or is it that kind of process? Yeah.
So there's a lot of public scrutiny throughout this process. So you prepare this budget, and it's all projections. So you're basing your projections is based on what you think the area can generate, how long the project's for, anywhere from 10 to 15 to 20 years. But the public scrutiny is huge. So the taxing entity committee will say, my portion is $1 million, say. well, we don't like that. We don't want to contribute $1 million to your project. We want to contribute 800,000. So it's all negotiated out. But yeah, anytime they can say, I don't like that you said public improvements is going to cost X amount of dollars. You guys need to figure that out and then come back to us. The public is not quite as drastic, I guess. What they can do is review those items, come to the public meeting, and then voice concerns, questions, and provide, and then the public body will take those into consideration in their decision. That makes sense. So I really debated whether to include this or not, and now I'm seeing it's just a lot to go through. But so what is redevelopment? Redevelopment is a catalyst for development. It is not something that you just go and do, because if something's going to happen anyways, redevelopment is not the tool you want to use. You can get things done on your own without this tool, but it is nice to have when it's available. And this is the other thing. It's a temporary diversion of future property tax revenues. A lot of the conversations that people have are, well, you're taking money out of my pocket to pay for this project, which is not the case at all. Tax increment is a future funding mechanism. So I'm going to go through a graph here that will talk about that a little bit better. So I'm going to skip that and go to this one. So you'll see down here, here's tax increment. And in hindsight, that's a bad color, so sad. So what happens is when you adopt a project area, you freeze the base. At the base year, you freeze that property tax or those values. So say it's $10 million in 2008, you freeze that there. Over time, investments made, improvements to properties, increases that value so that you have what's called the increment. This part right here is the incremental increase over the base year. That portion can be used to reinvest into the area, whether it's public infrastructure, improvements, land write-downs. Those are the different things that can be used for. And then at the end of the project, it's generating that much more. So these taxing entities, what they always see is, okay, you're going to freeze it here, and you're going to take all my money. And they fail to see that in the end, they're going to be that much more ahead because the property is going to be valued at so much more. The school district is a big benefactor in these projects, but because their budgets are kind of tight, they're the ones who probably provide the most scrutiny when you're going through the process. You know, where are our dollars going? What are they being used for? And why do you guys need to do this? Are the big questions. Does that make sense? Is that clear as mud? It took me a while to understand this graph, but okay. So here's what it can be used for: public infrastructure, public improvements, and affordable housing. So the three that I talked about at the beginning, URA, I'll just do URA, EDA, CDA. URAs require 20% set aside for housing. So when you come into a project, an urban renewal, an urban renewal area, there is a 20% set aside in the budget for affordable housing. And that comes off every budget. It doesn't matter where the project is. If it's an urban renewal area, that comes out and it goes into a housing trust fund so that it can be utilized to build affordable housing.
This is specific to Utah as set by the state legislature?
Yeah, right, this is specific in the state statute, absolutely.
So what's that fund right now? Is that the Owen Walker?
So there's the Olin Walker Housing Trust Fund, which is where most of the dollars go to, and they're utilized statewide for affordable housing. The county actually has a housing trust fund as well, where they, I gotta tread lightly with that one. They have a housing trust fund, I'll say, and money has been used for affordable housing projects. There's a project in Mill Creek right now that's 136 units that they utilized $800,000 out of this fund to offset some of their costs, or actually for the land purchase is what it was.
Does that, for example, the Owen Walker Trust Fund, does that have, when they put that money into the project, does that have a certain, rate and term, and when do they want that back, and or is it?
Salt Lake County, because we have our own housing trust fund, we've never actually dealt a lot with it, and what is usually done is it's sent to the Olin Walker Housing Trust Fund. We've kept a lot of our dollars locally so that we administer them ourselves. So I don't know exactly, Flynn, but we could probably find out.
There's a for the county's housing trust fund, there's a board that makes recommendations, and then the county council is one who makes the decisions on it.
Okay.
So if you were building an affordable housing project and you wanted to use the housing trust fund money, you would go pitch to them what your idea is. You may be wanting to borrow it interest-free or low interest, or maybe you want them to subsidize it. You'd have to go sell that idea to them, and they would make a recommendation to the
I assume it's the same for Ole Walker.
So they bought the land on that, Bud Bailey Apartments with the Housing Trust Fund, and the sign is making new construction on it. So, and it's also been used for bridge loans, and it can be used really creatively. There's no other restrictions.
So I just want to talk real quickly about blight. So sometimes blight is not necessarily what you think. Because of the negative connotation, projects that I've been associated with, there's a lot of public outcry, but this right here could be blight. Could be. That's just gross, but the picture was there, so I put it in. Could be. That's mold, in case you weren't aware. And then that was a crawl feature that I just wanted to use with the worms, so that's why I was included. So those aren't necessarily elements of blight. They are gross and they are disgusting in some cases, but blight is, and you can't see it very well, but it's often misconstrued. People think that blight means that their property is uninhabitable and disgusting and gross and nobody wants to go near it. But in most cases, it's just a matter of criteria that the statute has outlined for what blight is. And I'm going to go through these real quick, just because they're not essential to the discussion that I want to have. So, in order for you to do an urban renewal, you can't have a greenfield. It can't be just open property. Has to be zoned for urban uses with utilities, and 50% improved. I'm going to go through this real quick. And then on top of that, there's 7 criteria that have to be met during the parcel by parcel analysis. So what happens is 50% of your property in an urban renewal area, I'll try to simplify it, 50% of your property in an urban renewal area has to be developed or have, I apologize, have improvements on it. Then 67% of the 50% has to have 4 of the 7 conditions on it to have a determination of blight. The reason that this has become so stringent is years ago, and this is what I was told from a consultant, but years ago in certain cities, they were coming in and declaring large swaths of land blighted because they weren't zoned urban and didn't have utilities or all these different things. They were just coming in and saying, oh, it's blighted. You can't, there's no utilities running to that, so we have to develop it. And that caused a lot of public outcry and problems, and so they came in and got a little more strict with the statute. So some of the things that don't necessarily have to be here, if it's a Superfund site or an industrial, inactive industrial site, that is kind of an automatic blight. So that's helpful too.
So you wouldn't have to meet all 7 or 4.
Right, because the contamination kind of supersedes that. If there's contamination, like Midvale, Bingham Junction, that area was a Superfund site, right? You know, so that was easy to determine whether or not that was that would work. So these are specific criteria for an urban plan when you're putting one together. And I don't want to get bogged down on these because I do want to have the ability to answer questions if you guys have any. But basically in the plan, you're describing how you're going to go away from blight, how you're going to alleviate it, how you're going to put together a plan to approach it and develop it. And then the budget identifies the revenues that are going to be in the project. So just to give you an idea, this ranges depending on your proposal, your projections, and what types of projects you have. So the county has 2 projects, and I'll keep coming back to the county because those are the ones I'm more of. We have 2 projects, one's 40 acres, one's 184 acres. The 40-acre project is projected to have $5 million in increment over 15 years. It's 40 acres. The 184 acres is projected to generate $17.5 million over 20 years. So depending on your project, some of these projects, they get up into like 50 million, 100 million, but we made some pretty conservative projections just to make sure we weren't causing ourselves too much grief or stress. The problem that creates is developers or private entity individuals who are investing have to come to the table with a little bit more money if they want a piece of the pie, so to speak. And eminent domain. So this is the economic development area. It's pretty much the same process, but I wanted to give you an idea that they all have a time process. Brody.
So what happens when, say, a project takes the tax increment?
Like,
repercussions?
like craft made it. I mean, like some buildings around. So that happens sometimes. Are you talking about a project just doesn't, pencil doesn't work, like one in another city? So what usually happens is we've had that. So our projects were adopted in 2009, and that was kind of when things were on the decline. And so what we had to do as a county is go back and renegotiate with all the taxing entities to reestablish a base year. So we said, look, our values are so far down that we don't think we're going to make it to trigger this budget when we thought we would. So we need to renegotiate with you with either that time frame so we can trigger later, or readjust the base year to a year that will make us able to, or allow us to accommodate that. So projects fail, they do, and it's up to the city or the individual to go back and renegotiate what they want to do. Cottonwood Mall was just renegotiated, I think, to trigger in 2017 because of all the problems and things that have occurred there. So you as a municipal agency have the ability to go back and have those conversations. The problem that you may run into is they'll say, well, if it doesn't work now, what makes you think it's going to work in 5 or 10 years? You know, they can at that point say, you don't have our vote, and it takes a lot more work to get those things that they change.
So they're still like a taxing entity, so they're taking, when does the money get put into the deal?
When does the money get put to the deal?
Well, like the taxing, is it coming, I guess I need to try to figure out where, is it getting taken out year after year?
How does it, so when you put together your capital stack for your project, you need, whatever.
So
$10 million bucks of equity. Basically, everything's gotta happen before you close your loan with your bank, because the bank's gonna require that everything be funded at the time of closing so that the budget's fully loaded, right?
Right.
So you're gonna have to have all your tax increment, whatever process, whatever you're using here is gonna have to all be funded and in place when your loan closes and the loan won't close. Is that right?
So what has been done, or what can be done, is, you know, sometimes cities will bond against that project and pay whatever's been negotiated out, and then they'll use the increment to pay off that bond. That's what's happened in the past. Usually, from my experience, we've gone and negotiated individually for reimbursements. And so the developer will come in and say, I'm going to make this kind of improvement, I'm going to invest this X amount of dollars. We'll do the number crunch, or we'll have somebody do the number crunch and say, based on your investment, here's how much we'll give you of that total pot of money. So that they can take that to their bank or whoever and say, the county has, you know, through contract, we enter into a contract, said they will commit this X amount of dollars to us to pay off our loans and take care of our business. But it can be done either way, reimbursements or bonding on the upfront and paying it off through the increment that's generated. But the increment is collected, so these project areas are adopted, and then they're outlined or recorded with the legal boundary, so that the assessor's office knows that that is a special area and that has special requirements with it, so that they set the money aside and then they distribute it through their process, basically. Whoever the entity is to receive it, and they have all that document, they're supposed to have all that documentation. Right.
So Spencer, if they don't bond to get that initial money up front, what's the process? Do they have to wait several years into their project till they have a nest egg to dole out? But
not necessarily a nest egg. So what they do is, when a developer comes in and says, look, I'm going to build a Walmart here, and you know, here's my costs and here's my numbers, and I'm going to invest this sort of money into it. And what can you guys bring to the table, or what partnership we have? That's all negotiated. So we say, you're going to invest $27.5 million. So this is how does it work as a developer? So you're going to come to the table as a developer and say, look, here's my costs, here's my pro forma, here's what I need to make it work, and then that's negotiated. That is a sit down, drag out. We had a negotiation that went on for close to a year with the developer, so that they got what they wanted, but we ensured that the county got what we needed for the project. So it's all negotiated out. You get what you negotiate. That's what my boss always told me. And when it comes to reimbursement agreements and these increments, in some cases the developer is driving it, and so the city's happy to throw whatever they need to at him to get it to happen. In other cases, it's more, we need to have an equal partnership where we're giving in good. So have a plan, bring in good solid numbers, because numbers don't lie, and then don't be you can interpret that for whatever you want. That was the point, but, and then that's it. So, any questions? Any other questions?
So my comment on, Danny, maybe you know, I haven't really done, I did one a long time ago. It was a, kind of a tax credit deal on some affordable housing down in Hurricane, Utah. And they used some Owen Walker money, and they had some, this developer had been awarded tax credits. And so what happens was when they award tax credits, those tax credits can be, if he's awarded those tax credits, those can be sold on the secondary market to some company that has a ton of money that wants to offset some of their gains with tax credits. They can monetize those credits, and those credits, when that purchase takes place, they get actual money, and that money becomes part of the equity in the deal. So the bank wants to have the budget fully loaded when the loan closes. So whatever way you get your equity, whether it's through one of these ways or some other way, the bank wants to know that the loan is fully loaded, or the budget's fully loaded when the loan closes, so that we know that there's no other outside variables or circumstances that could happen that could impact our ability to get repaid, which is via the project getting fully completed, fully stabilized, and then going to the permanent market and getting us taken out. So I guess that's kind of boils back to the question that either Brody or Ryan asked, which was how do all these monies come into the project? Because the bank, we don't want to know that you've been awarded $2.5 million from an RDA or through an urban renewal, and that these monies are going to come in over the next year and a half, or some other, because in our mind, equity all funds first. And these funds are equity dollars. So somehow all these agreements and all these monies need to be identified upfront and funded prior to the bank loan closing. That's kind of the way we work. So, and maybe you guys have seen it happen differently in your line of business, but
So generally, redevelopment funds aren't used as equity for that very reason that you're describing, unless you, as a developer, go into a mature project area that's been in place a long time and it already has been triggered, and so revenue is being generated, and they may have a fund balance in there from that. You're probably not going to get money up front. Usually, how it works is if it's enough money that a developer can put in their pro forma and maybe a cushion their profit. Maybe they wouldn't make profit without the redevelopment funds, but the bank would still need it to pencil otherwise, and you can come up with your. So that's generally how they work. But also it could work, since most of it's usually used for infrastructure. If you're building a large project and you're phasing it, and you know at some point you have to upgrade a utility line, then you can be building your initial phases and work through your pro forma, and you'll get the RDA. You'll know roughly what the value is after your first few phases are built. We'll be able to trigger it, and so we enter into a reimbursement agreement up front, and then you know that you can use that to upgrade your sewer and water line when you get to phase 4.
Okay.
Down at Geneva, the old Geneva Steel site in Utah County, the developer is going to be reimbursed for infrastructure through impact fees, future impact fees. There's another example of how the reimbursements can be structured. That money's a long time coming.
That's one of the poster childs for redevelopment law and all the changes that it's been through from what I understand. Yeah, there's several mechanisms in it, and you get somebody creative in there to structure those deals, figure those things out, and you get the city to buy in. There's really no limits. Redevelopment really opens a lot of doors for developers.
So on the condemnation side, have you guys heard of the Kelo case? So it's kind of an interesting story. I think it was 2005. Small town in Connecticut, I think. the city went and condemned some property to give to, so they were basically taking it from one private property owner and giving it to another private property owner, developer, for a redevelopment project. And the project went bust, and they turned it into a landfill for a while. So the original property owner was going, what the heck here, you took my property, now it's a landfill. So it went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and it was a 5-4 decision in favor of being able to condemn property for redevelopment. And in fact, it did fall within the constitutional bounds of eminent domain. And so my question is that, I'm not aware of any condemnation happening locally to benefit developers, but have you seen that?
I'm sure it has happened. We haven't experienced it in the county, but I know that the law for condemnation has evolved quite dramatically over the course of time to where now it has to be property owner driven. It has to be like 2/3 of the property owners. It can't be like tenants or residents. It has to be property owners that own X amount of acreage, and they have to push that person out basically. And all the county does is facilitate it. The county actually, in one of our projects, there was a request that we remove the eminent domain aspect, the condemnation aspect from it. Our county council actually voted to keep it in place for those who want to benefit from the tax benefits for eminent domain. So, but I'm not aware of it being used on any kind of scale around here.